They told her she didn't belong in first class right after she paid for the entire cabin with her company's account. That was the insult that ignited everything. Dr. Maya Robinson, a black woman CEO whose company had reshaped sustainable agriculture across the globe, had boarded American Meridian Flight 782 for what should have been a routine business trip from Los Angeles to New York. She wasn't just successful, she was a pioneer. At 38, Maya had built Agrinova Technologies into a billion-dollar powerhouse, patented cutting-edge AI solutions, and addressed the world stage at Davos. Yet at 30,000 feet, none of her accomplishments seemed to matter. To one flight attendant, she was not a world leader. She was invisible. The tension began the moment she settled into seat 2A. The cabin shimmered with polished wood, crisp linen, and the quiet chatter of powerful men in tailored suits. It was a space designed for prestige. But instead of respect, Maya received silence, pointed, deliberate silence. The senior attendant swept through the aisle with champagne flutes and honeyed greetings for every passenger, except her. It was as though the seat she occupied was empty, a detail erased from the room. For Maya, who had fought her way into boardrooms that didn't expect to see a black woman in power, the sting was familiar. But something about this moment felt heavier. It wasn't about a drink or about comfort. It was about dignity. This was the opening act of a confrontation that would ground a multi-million-dollar jet and shake an entire airline to its core. So when the world asked later how a single woman could force an entire system to face its prejudice, the answer was simple: she refused to be erased. If you've ever been dismissed or made to feel like you didn't belong in a place you earned, drop a yes in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. The polished quiet of American Meridian's first-class cabin was supposed to soothe, but on Flight 782, it felt more like a stage set for judgment. Wide leather seats gleamed under muted lighting. Silverware clinked softly on linen-covered trays. The air carried the faint aroma of champagne and citrus. This was the sanctuary of America's wealthiest flyers' hedge fund, titans, entertainment moguls, and heirs to old money dynasties. It was a place where exclusivity wasn't just sold, it was enforced through subtle cues of belonging. Dr. Maya Robinson reclined in seat 2A, her posture calm, yet unmistakably self-assured. To any observer, she fit the part-tailored navy suit, sleek tablet in hand, a mind already moving between global markets and agricultural sustainability. She was not only a paying customer, she was the kind of client airlines dream of, retaining a corporate account worth $20 million annually. Her company, Agrinova Technologies, wasn't just profitable, it was rewriting the future of how nations fed their people. Forbes had profiled her. Wired had praised her patents. She was without question more accomplished than most in that cabin combined. Yet status and brilliance didn't shield her from the one thing that crept in like a cold draft erasure. Around her, attendants glided seamlessly from passenger to passenger. A portly man in 1C was addressed with warm familiarity as Mr. Brooks. A chic woman in 3B was complimented on her silk scarf, her glass refilled before it was even empty. Conversations sparkled with practiced ease, everyone made to feel seen, cherished, catered to. Everyone except Maya. When the senior attendant, Carolyn Miller, reached her row, her gaze slid past 2A, as if Maya wasn't there. No smile, no greeting, no champagne flute. It was as though Maya's presence disrupted the careful architecture of first class, as though she were a crack in the polished glass. Maya didn't frown, didn't demand recognition. She simply observed. Years of navigating boardrooms had taught her that silence could be as sharp as a blade. Still, a familiar knot of exhaustion pressed against her chest. How many times must she reassert her existence in spaces where her worth should be undeniable? She steadied her breathing, lifted her tablet, and told herself she'd ask again later. But the script was already unfolding. This wasn't a simple oversight. It was the first line in a pattern about to expose something far deeper than customer service failure. Every story of conflict has its cast, and on Flight 782, the roles were already taking shape. At the center of the unfolding tension was Carolyn Miller, the senior flight attendant. She was a woman in her late 50s with hair fixed into an immovable blonde helmet and a smile that never quite touched her eyes. 3 decades in the industry had made her efficient, polished, and to some intimidating. To Maya, she radiated something colder, an authority sharpened by entitlement, a quiet belief that she had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. Alongside her moved Emily Carter, the junior attendant. Emily's every gesture contrasted with Carolyn's. She was fresh-faced, eager, her movements marked by nervous energy. Her smile reached her eyes bright and authentic. She moved quickly, attentive to detail, always double-checking service lists. Emily was not yet hardened by the years of hierarchy and favoritism that governed crews like Carolyn's. She noticed more than she let on. And, in a few hours, her quiet presence would become a critical turning point in the battle about to erupt. In the cockpit sat Captain James Anderson, a man in his mid-40s whose life revolved around decisions measured in seconds and stakes as high as lives. Calm authority defined him, neatly trimmed beard, clear eyes, a voice trained to steady turbulence, both mechanical and human. For now he was unaware that turbulence in the cabin was about to challenge his leadership more than any storm cloud ever could. Among the passengers, two figures would also step into significance. William Brooks, seated in 1C, was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm in Manhattan. His keen eyes flicked between his newspaper and the subtle dynamics around him, filing away impressions like evidence. Linda Cooper, the woman in 3B, wore wealth as casually as her designer scarf. Her smile to Carolyn, her laughter at small compliments reinforced how easily privilege translated into service. Neither Brooks nor Cooper knew yet that they would become witnesses to something that would ripple far beyond this cabin. The stage was set, the enforcer, the observer, the commander, and the silent jury of fellow travelers. And in seat 2A, Dr. Maya Robinson, poised, patient and invisible, prepared to endure what she had endured in countless boardrooms. But this time she wouldn't just take notes, this time she would transform insult into reckoning. It began with a silence so sharp it could almost be heard. Carolyn Miller, the senior attendant, glided into the first-class aisle with the choreography of someone who had repeated this performance thousands of times. A silver tray balanced effortlessly on her palm, champagne bubbling in crystal flutes. Her voice, honeyed and professional, rose and fell like a well-rehearsed script. "Mr. Brooks, welcome aboard." "Champagne for you," she cooed at the lawyer in 1C. His broad smile answered for him. "Mrs. Cooper, that scarf is stunning. May I offer you a glass before takeoff?" The woman in 3B blushed at the compliment, adjusting her wrap as she accepted her drink. Passenger by passenger, Carolyn distributed not just beverages, but affirmation, small gifts of recognition that reminded each one of their worth. The cabin filled with murmurs of gratitude, the faint clink of glasses, and the soothing cadence of belonging. Then she reached row 2. "Seat 2A, Sana, Doctor." Maya Robinson sat poised, her posture relaxed, her tablet resting lightly in her hands. She glanced up, ready to meet Carolyn's eyes, to request a simple glass of water before departure. But Carolyn's gaze skimmed past her as though 2A were unoccupied. Her polished smile remained in place, but it curved toward the man in 2B instead. Without pause, without hesitation, Carolyn walked by tray, still full voice, still sweet, as if Maya were a shadow in the corner of her vision. Maya blinked once, her lips parting as though to speak, then pressed them together again. She had been through this before too many times. The assumption of absence, the invisible treatment in a room where her presence should have been undeniable. She knew the sting well enough to identify it immediately, not oversight but choice. She leaned back against the leather seat, her mind working faster than her pulse. Years of boardroom battles had taught her restraint. Confrontation now would yield little more than deflection, perhaps even escalation. She told herself she would wait, give Carolyn the benefit of the doubt, and ask again later. But the first blow had already landed. In a cabin built to honor presence, Maya had been deliberately erased, and like the opening move in a chess game, it was a strike that set the tone for everything to follow. Have you ever felt invisible in a place where you had every right to belong? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might give courage to someone else facing the same silence. What might have been dismissed as a momentary oversight soon hardened into a pattern. After the champagne round the cabin settled into its rhythm, the thud of closing overhead bins, the subtle vibrations as the aircraft taxied down the runway, the soft announcement of takeoff. Dr. Maya Robinson remained composed, her tablet glowing faintly, as she reviewed notes for a presentation she would never give that day. She reminded herself that patience was power, that not every slight required immediate battle. But once the plane leveled at cruising altitude and service began in earnest, Carolyn Miller reappeared, this time with the authority of command. The meal orders started as they always did from the front of the cabin. Each passenger was greeted by name, offered choices, and engaged in small pleasantries. Maya listened as Mr. Brooks discussed a wine pairing, as Mrs. Cooper asked for an extra pillow, as the man across the aisle ordered confidently. The small details of care filled the air like a melody of belonging. Then came the silence again. Carolyn's eyes glided once more over seat 2A as if Maya were nothing but upholstery. No pause, no greeting, no chance to speak. Straight past directly to the passenger in row 3. It was deliberate now, undeniable. The erasure was no longer a single slip, it was a choice. Repeated, sharpened, and reinforced. A cold knot formed in Maya's stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the fatigue of repetition, the grinding exhaustion of constantly having to prove existence in spaces she had already earned. She was not merely a woman in a seat. She was a black woman in a space that in Carolyn's mind rejected her by default. Maya's hand hovered over the call button but stopped. Instead, she drew a slow, steady breath, schooling her face into calm neutrality. She observed. She collected data. The scientist in her knew that one incident could be excused as chance, but two identical acts formed a trend, and in trends lay the evidence of truth. Around her forks clinked glasses, sparkled conversations flowed. To everyone else, service was seamless. To Maya, it was the construction of exclusion layer by deliberate layer. The game was no longer about coffee or comfort. It was about visibility, belonging, and the quiet violence of being erased twice. And Maya knew with certainty that this was only the beginning. The third act of silence was more than Maya Robinson was willing to let pass. Every passenger around her had been acknowledged, offered, and served. Glasses clinked the aroma of fresh brewed coffee, curled through the cabin, and trays gleamed under overhead lights. Yet in seat 2A, Maya's hands were empty. Not a sip of water, not a word of courtesy. She steadied her breath and pressed the call button. A soft ping echoed through the first-class cabin, drawing a few glances. Seconds later, Carolyn Miller appeared. The polished warmth she had shown the other passengers was gone. Her smile was clipped mechanical, her eyes carrying an edge of irritation. Yes. The single word dropped like a stone, brittle and dismissive. Maya lifted her chin, her voice calm, steady. I believe you may have missed me during service. I'd like a cup of black coffee, please. For a heartbeat, Carolyn just stared. The corners of her mouth twitched, not toward kindness, but toward disdain, before smoothing into forced neutrality. I'll get to it when I'm finished with the other passengers, she replied, her tone sharp enough to draw a line in the air. Then she turned, pivoting on her heel, and moved briskly down the aisle to serve the next row. Maya's gaze followed her, unblinking. The knot in her stomach tightened, but she made no outburst. She simply sat straighter every inch, the CEO accustomed to negotiations in hostile rooms. She had not raised her voice, she had not demanded special treatment, she had simply asked for coffee, the same request already fulfilled for everyone else. Minutes passed like hours. The scent of coffee grew richer, cups landed neatly on linen trays, silverware clinked as passengers stirred sugar into porcelain mugs. Maya remained empty-handed, a silent island in a sea of service. Her mind, trained as both scientist and strategist, marked the moment precisely. This was no accident, this was deliberate exclusion, an erasure performed with quiet malice. She noted the evidence, the timing, the witnesses. The data was piling up. Patience was a virtue, but silence was complicity. Maya's hand hovered again over the call button. She was done being erased. The second press of the call button was no gentle request. This time, Maya Robinson held it down for 3 full seconds, forcing the chime to linger in the air like an alarm. A few passengers glanced up, eyes flicking between her calm figure in 2A and the galley door. It was no longer a private slight. It was becoming a performance one with an audience. Carolyn Miller emerged, her step stiff, her face thundercloud dark. She leaned into Maya's row, her voice dropping to a low hiss that carried a venomous edge. I am very busy, as you can see. You'll have to wait your turn. Maya's gaze swept the cabin. Every other passenger was already sipping from cups, nibbling on warm rolls, their trays neatly arranged. The 2 other attendants stood idle by the galley, their hands empty, their eyes darting nervously. Maya turned back to Carolyn, her voice, even her posture, unyielding. My turn, for what exactly? She asked the question, as precise as a scalpel. Everyone else has been served. I have made a simple, polite request for a cup of coffee. Twice now. And you have gone out of your way to ignore me since I stepped on this plane. The words landed in the silence like a hammer. William Brooks in 1C lowered his newspaper. Linda Cooper in 3B froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. The passengers were no longer bystanders. They had become witnesses. Carolyn's face flushed, her composure cracking under the weight of exposure. We reserve the right to refuse service to disruptive passengers, she snapped, her pitch rising with panic. Maya arched a single eyebrow. Disruptive. She repeated, her tone dangerously quiet. By asking for coffee? Or is it my presence in this seat that you find disruptive? The accusation shimmered in the air. Undeniable, undeniable. Carolyn shifted closer, lowering her voice again, reaching for condescension disguised as familiarity. Listen, honey, she whispered, venom in her smile. Maybe you're not used to how things work up here. This cabin is for our premier guests. Sometimes people get upgraded by mistake. If you just sit tight and keep quiet, nobody has to make a fuss. It was the final straw, the moment when insult crystallized into clarity. Maya was not just being ignored, she was being told she didn't belong. What would you have said in Maya's place? Drop your response below. Your words might inspire someone else to stand their ground. The word honey lingered in the air like acid burning through the thin fabric of civility. Carolyn Miller's smirk carried more weight than any shouted insult. It was the mask of someone convinced she was safe inside her prejudice, protected by seniority, by the invisible shield of authority she wielded in this cabin. Her suggestion that Maya Robinson had been upgraded by mistake wasn't just patronizing, it was an erasure wrapped in sugar, a declaration that Maya could not possibly belong in first class regardless of her tailored suit, her calm dignity, or the millions of dollars her company funneled into this airline every year. For a moment, the knot in Maya's stomach twisted tighter, as though years of microaggressions had condensed into this single razor-sharp moment. But then, as quickly as the pain flared, something else took its place: clarity. Cold, crystalline clarity. This was not about coffee anymore. It had never been. This was about dignity, the fundamental right to exist without having to justify one's presence. Maya's breathing slowed. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority that no uniform could diminish. "You've made two critical errors, Miss Miller," she said, using Carolyn's name deliberately. "First, you assumed you knew who I was. You don't. Second, and far more important, you assumed I would tolerate your bigotry. I won't." Carolyn's cheeks flushed crimson, her mouth opening as though to retort, but no words came. The hush in the cabin thickened. William Brooks in 1C tilted his head, eyes narrowing, memorizing every detail, as though already drafting a deposition. Linda Cooper in 3B pressed her lips together, her earlier amusement replaced by discomfort. The balance of power had shifted almost imperceptibly, but irrevocably. Maya reached for her phone, her thumb already sliding across the screen with purposeful precision. She wasn't searching for distractions. She was opening pathways to accountability. In the glow of her screen, corporate contact forms and regulatory hotlines flickered like weapons waiting to be unsheathed. This was no tantrum. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Maya Robinson no longer felt the sting of Carolyn Miller's condescension. The exhaustion, the tight knot in her chest, it dissolved into a single unwavering conviction. This was not about service, it was about safety. Not just her personal dignity, but the integrity of an entire cabin. A crew member whose judgment was clouded by prejudice was more than unprofessional. She was a liability at 30,000 feet. Maya raised her eyes, meeting Carolyn's glare, with a calm that seemed carved from stone. She spoke slowly, deliberately, her voice steady enough to carry across the hushed rows of first class. "You have created a hostile environment. I am now compelled to report a safety concern regarding your conduct." The word safety cut sharper than any accusation of rudeness. In aviation, it wasn't a suggestion, it was an alarm bell. Carolyn's face flickered, the practiced mask slipping for just a heartbeat. "The captain is busy flying the plane," she snapped, grasping at authority she no longer held. "He doesn't have time for your little tantrums." Maya didn't flinch. She held up her phone, the airline's corporate complaint page glowing in her hand like a legal summons. "He'll make time," she replied evenly. "And let me assure you, what's coming isn't a tantrum. It's accountability." Turning her gaze toward the younger attendant, Maya's tone shifted from icy precision to quiet command. "Emily," she said, using her name like a lifeline. "Please inform Captain James Anderson that a passenger in 2A needs to report a safety concern regarding the conduct of his senior crew member. Tell him it's urgent." Emily Carter froze, her eyes wide. She understood the gravity of the word safety. It bypassed customer service. It demanded immediate action. Pale and trembling, she nodded and hurried toward the cockpit, her steps quick, almost desperate. Carolyn remained rooted in the aisle, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. Around them, first-class passengers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Maya's composed figure and the unraveling authority of the senior attendant. The plane still soared eastward, but the balance of control had already changed. With one precise invocation of procedure, Dr. Maya Robinson had wrested power from prejudice and placed it squarely back in the realm of accountability. The cockpit door opening mid-flight is a sacred event. It does not happen lightly, and when it does, the entire cabin holds its breath. On Flight 782, the silence deepened as Captain James Anderson stepped into first class. His uniform was immaculate, his movements controlled his presence, radiating the calm authority of a man accustomed to navigating storms both in the skies and in human tempests. His gaze swept the cabin, taking in the tableau. Before him, Dr. Maya Robinson, seated upright in 2A, composed yet resolute phone, still glowing faintly in her hand. Carolyn Miller, standing stiffly nearby, her jaw clenched, her polished exterior cracking under strain. The other passengers frozen in their seats, pretending to look away but watching every detail. Captain Anderson stopped beside Maya's row, his voice low but firm, designed to de-escalate. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Anderson. My first officer tells me you have a safety concern." "Can you explain?" Maya turned her face toward him, meeting his steady eyes without flinching. "Thank you for coming, Captain. Yes, I do. My concern is with the fitness for duty of your senior flight attendant, Ms. Miller. Since boarding, she has engaged in a deliberate and targeted pattern of discrimination. She has refused me service, treated me with hostility, and accused me baselessly of being disruptive. This is not merely discourteous, it demonstrates compromised judgment. In the event of an actual emergency, I cannot trust she would perform her duties impartially. That makes her unfit for this role." The words were crisp, professional, as precise as a legal brief. She was not pleading, she was testifying. Anderson's brows lifted slightly. He turned to Carolyn. "Miss Miller, how do you respond to this allegation?" Carolyn pounced, her voice pitched high, eager to reclaim authority. "Captain, she's been difficult from the moment she boarded, demanding, aggressive. I was simply trying to complete service and she became hostile. I've been with this airline 30 years, I would never." But Anderson cut her off, his tone shifting firmer now. "So you deny refusing her service?" Carolyn faltered. "I told her I would get to her when I could. It was a weak defense, and everyone in the cabin knew it." Maya remained silent, letting the weight of the facts speak louder than emotion. The stage was no longer Carolyn's. Control had shifted to the captain, and beneath his calm, exterior risk assessment calculations had already begun. "Have you ever seen truth stand so strong it cut through excuses instantly? If so, hit like, because truth always deserves the spotlight." For a long moment, the air in first class felt like glass, fragile, transparent, and ready to shatter. Captain James Anderson's question still hung unanswered. "Did you refuse her service?" Carolyn Miller's weak defense faltered in the silence, and every eye in the cabin shifted toward her. She stood rigid, her fists clenched at her sides, her practiced poise eroding grain by grain. Maya Robinson didn't fill the silence. She didn't need to. She simply turned her head slightly, letting her gaze rest first on William Brooks in 1C, then on Linda Cooper in 3B. She knew they had seen it all. She knew their silence could become complicity or it could become truth. William Brooks, the seasoned lawyer, adjusted his glasses and gave the smallest of nods. It was subtle, but undeniable. His eyes met the captain's, calm and certain, as though confirming without words that every detail of Maya's account was accurate. A man who spent his life weighing evidence had just weighed the facts and delivered his verdict. Linda Cooper's reaction was less direct. She kept her eyes fixed on the tray before her, her fork idle, her cheeks flushed pink. She didn't speak, but her body betrayed her discomfort. She knew what she had seen, and the absence of denial was in its own way as damning as Brooks's confirmation. Maya broke the silence with a voice measured, clear, unshaken. "Captain, your crew member, Emily Carter, also witnessed the exchanges, as did Mr. Brooks and Mrs. Cooper. They can verify that I was polite, patient, and ignored repeatedly. The record is not mine alone." Anderson's eyes swept the cabin again, his pilot's instincts attuned to risk and corroboration. What he saw, Brooks's steady nod, Cooper's flushed silence, Emily's pale, stricken face, was all the testimony he needed. The truth was no longer an allegation. It had become consensus. Carolyn opened her mouth, ready to launch another protest, but the words seemed to curdle on her tongue. The walls of credibility had already closed in around her. Anderson's jaw tightened. He wasn't a judge, but he was a commander, and the evidence before him pointed to a single conclusion: a volatile crew member had compromised the integrity of his cabin. Captain James Anderson stood tall in the narrow aisle, the weight of command pressing on his shoulders. He had heard enough. The mosaic of evidence was clear: a credible, composed passenger, corroborating witnesses, a junior attendant whose frightened eyes spoke volumes, and a senior crew member unraveling under scrutiny. In aviation, hesitation could be deadly. His job was not only to keep the aircraft aloft, but also to keep order within its walls. He turned toward Carolyn Miller, his voice stripped of warmth, honed to an edge of pure authority. "Ms. Miller, go to the rear galley. Stay there. You are relieved of your duties in this cabin. Emily Carter will handle first-class service for the remainder of this flight." The words hit like a hammer. Carolyn recoiled, her face blanching before blooming crimson with outrage. "What, Captain? You can't be serious. You're taking her side." Her voice cracked shrill, carrying across the cabin like a warning siren. Anderson's expression didn't waver. "I am not taking sides, Miss Miller. I am managing my crew and ensuring the safety of this flight. You have become the center of a major disruption. That is unacceptable. Now go to the rear galley. That is a direct order." For a heartbeat, Carolyn stood frozen, her chest heaving, as though defiance still fought for space in her throat. But the hierarchy of command was unshakable. With a violent flick of her shoulder, she spun on her heel and stalked down the aisle. In her fury, she clipped the arm of a passenger in economy who shot her a startled look. Carolyn didn't apologize. She didn't even slow down. She disappeared into the rear of the aircraft, a figure exiled, her authority shattered. The captain turned back to Maya, his voice softening slightly. "Ma'am, I apologize for the conduct of my crew member. Please rest assured it will be dealt with." He paused, searching for the right words. "Can I get you that coffee now?" A murmur rippled through the cabin, relief mingling with unease. On the surface, order had been restored. Maya had won the immediate battle, but her stillness, her unwavering eyes told a different story. Removing Carolyn from sight didn't erase the harm. It merely swept the dust under the rug. This wasn't about a cup of coffee anymore. It was about trust, and once broken, trust couldn't be patched with polite apologies. Dr. Maya Robinson did not smile at Captain Anderson's offer. The idea of finally receiving the coffee she had been denied seemed almost absurd now, like offering a bandage to someone who had just been shot. She sat straighter in her seat, her voice measured, steady, but carrying a quiet force that shifted the energy of the entire cabin. "No, Captain," she said, her tone resolute. "This is not about coffee anymore, and I'm afraid this is not over." The words froze the air. The passengers leaned in unconsciously, as though the cabin itself tilted toward her. Even Emily Carter, clutching the service cart, nervously seemed to draw closer, caught in the gravity of Maya's presence. "You've addressed the symptom?" Maya continued, her gaze unwavering. "But the root cause remains. You have a senior crew member who has shown herself incapable of performing her duties without prejudice. Moving her to the back of the plane does not solve the problem, it merely hides it for a few hours. And hiding a problem is not safety, it's negligence." Captain Anderson shifted his weight. He was a man accustomed to command, but Maya's words held a gravity that challenged even his authority. "I want you to understand who I am," she said, her tone calm, never rising yet, cutting through the cabin with surgical precision. "My name is Dr. Maya Robinson. I am the founder and CEO of AgriNova Technologies. My company holds the Platinum Corporate Account with American Meridian Airlines. We spend upwards of $20 million annually on travel for our executives and scientists. I am not simply speaking to you as a passenger, I am speaking as one of your airline's largest corporate clients." The number landed like a thunderclap: $20 million. Every passenger's head lifted. Even Captain Anderson's eyes flickered a crack in his professional composure. "I no longer consent to being a passenger on this flight," Maya declared. "The integrity of your crew has been compromised. The trust between passenger and airline is broken. Under FAA regulations, you cannot dismiss a credible safety concern, which means you now face a choice: proceed to New York and gamble on the fallout, or acknowledge the severity of this situation and return to Los Angeles." The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time since the confrontation began, it was no longer Carolyn who looked cornered. It was the captain himself, caught between regulation liability and a woman who wielded both truth and power like weapons honed for battle. Captain James Anderson stood motionless, the weight of a decision pressing against him, heavier than the aircraft itself. Around him, the cabin had gone utterly still, as though every passenger held their breath. Dr. Maya Robinson's words still reverberated. "I no longer consent to being a passenger on this flight." She hadn't shouted. She hadn't moved a muscle out of place. Yet she had shifted the balance of power at 30,000 feet. Anderson knew the stakes. Ignoring a passenger's declared safety concern wasn't just risky, it was reckless. And this wasn't any passenger. It was a corporate titan whose words could trigger lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, and media firestorms. His pilot's brain ran the calculations, liability, procedure, consequence. There was only one path forward. He lifted his hand to the radio, his voice steady clipped professional. "Denver Center, this is American Meridian 782. We have a cabin safety issue and will need to return to Los Angeles. Declaring pan pan." The phrase hung in the air like a lightning strike. Pan pan. It wasn't Mayday, but it wasn't routine either. It was the international code for urgency, serious enough to divert an aircraft, serious enough to force every official on the ground to prepare for disruption. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Linda Cooper's fork clattered softly onto her tray. William Brooks exhaled slowly, his lawyer's mind already cataloging this as precedent. Emily Carter's eyes widened, her hand instinctively tightening on the cart. Even those in economy far removed from the confrontation could feel the shift as the plane banked gently, beginning its return to California. Maya sat perfectly still, her tablet closed, now her gaze forward, calm and unyielding. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stood from her seat. Yet she had turned an airliner back to its origin. Not through chaos, not through tantrum, but through precision, authority, and the refusal to accept erasure. As the city lights of Los Angeles began to flicker back into view, the passengers realized they were part of something historic. A woman in 2A had done what most could never imagine. She had forced accountability midair, and the turbulence everyone knew was only just beginning. The descent into Los Angeles was cloaked in an eerie quiet. Passengers who had boarded expecting champagne and cross-country comfort now found themselves peering through oval windows at the familiar sprawl of the city they thought they had already left behind. Conversations were hushed, speculative whispers about safety issues threading through the economy cabin. But in first class, silence sat heavier than turbulence. The aircraft rolled to the gate with a dull, definitive thud as the jet bridge connected. Then Captain Anderson's voice crackled over the intercom. "Calm but firm, Dr. Robinson, a gate agent and station manager will meet you as you deplane." It was an announcement disguised as courtesy, but saturated with gravity. Everyone understood this was no ordinary delay. Maya Robinson gathered her leather briefcase and coat with deliberate, unhurried movements. She did not rush. She did not hide. As she stood, William Brooks in 1C caught her eye. The seasoned lawyer leaned slightly toward her, sliding a thick embossed card into her hand. "Ma'am," he murmured, "that was the most professionally executed maneuver I've ever witnessed. If you need a witness, you have mine." His voice carried the weight of credibility and power. Maya inclined her head. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I appreciate that." Her voice was calm, even gracious, but her eyes held steel. At the doorway, Carolyn Miller stood stiffly, summoned forward from the rear galley by order of the captain. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with fury she dared not unleash. She refused to look at Maya, focusing instead on a fixed point on the bulkhead, as though willing herself invisible. It was a pitiful irony. Minutes ago she had tried to erase Maya. Now she was the one reduced to absence. Waiting on the jet bridge were two figures, a flustered gate agent in the crisp navy uniform of American Meridian, and Thomas Reed, the duty station manager, in a rumpled suit, sweat beading at his temples. His expression was the look of a man whose quiet Tuesday morning had just exploded into crisis. Dr. Robinson Reed began, voice overly smooth, straining for control. "I'm Thomas Reed. We understand there was a misunderstanding on board. We deeply apologize for any inconvenience. We'd be happy to rebook you on the next flight to New York, departing in 90 minutes. In the meantime, our flagship lounge is available for your comfort." It was the language of inconvenience, the tone of customer service, wine and vouchers as currency for calm. But Maya Robinson did not come off that plane looking for comfort. She came prepared for accountability. What would you say if an airline manager tried to dismiss blatant discrimination as a misunderstanding? Drop your answer below. Your voice matters in rewriting these scripts. Dr. Maya Robinson did not return Thomas Reed's rehearsed smile. She studied him for a long moment, her silence slicing through his script like glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was precise, cool and deliberate, every syllable weighed. "Mr. Reed," she began, "let's be clear. This was not a misunderstanding. Flight 782 did not return to Los Angeles because of an inconvenience. It returned because a passenger declared a safety issue stemming from targeted harassment and discrimination by your senior flight attendant, Carolyn Miller. Reed swallowed hard, his practiced expression faltering. Behind him, the young gate agent shifted uncomfortably, sensing the gravity of Maya's words. The corridor of the jet bridge seemed to tighten. Every sound amplified the faint hum of the aircraft systems, the shuffle of curious passengers peering from their seats, the shallow breaths of those who realized this was not a negotiation about delays, it was the opening statement of a legal reckoning. Maya extended her hand palm up, not as a plea, but as a demand. I will require the full names and employee identification numbers of everyone on that crew. Captain James Anderson, First Officer Daniel Harris, flight attendants Carolyn Miller and Emily Carter. You will provide them now, Reed stammered. I'm not sure I'm authorized. You can either provide them now, Maya interrupted, her tone steady, or you can provide them to my legal team later today. The choice is yours. The threat was not bluster, it was inevitability. Maya's unflinching eyes left Reed with nowhere to hide. Just then the cockpit door opened. Captain Anderson emerged, clipboard in hand, Emily Carter following close behind. The captain's voice was clipped, formal, but not unkind. Mr. Reed, here's my preliminary report. Get statements from the crew and relevant passengers. And for the record, the other attendant's full name is Emily Carter. Dr. Robinson, you handled yourself with remarkable composure. Emily's eyes brimmed with conflicted emotions. Fear, guilt, admiration. Ma'am, she whispered, voice trembling. I'm so sorry for what happened. What Miss Miller did was wrong. Everyone saw it. Maya's expression softened just for her. It takes courage to say that. Thank you, Emily. In the sterile glow of the jet bridge, the battle lines were now formally drawn. Reed scribbled furiously. Anderson stood at attention. Emily hovered in nervous solidarity, and Carolyn lurked behind them, silent but burning. Maya had shifted the encounter from personal insult to documented evidence. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a plaintiff in waiting. Dr. Maya Robinson stepped aside from the tight circle on the jet bridge, her posture unshaken, her movements deliberate. The murmurs of passengers behind her blurred into background noise as she pulled out her phone. One by one, she dialed the numbers that would transform a humiliating flight into a corporate crisis. Her assistant answered first. Brenda Maya said, her voice crisp, professional, and unwavering. It's Maya. Cancel my return ticket on American Meridian. In fact, cancel all my upcoming bookings with that airline, effective immediately. She paused, letting the instruction settle, then added, draft a letter to Edward Coleman, CEO of American Meridian. Inform him that Agranova Technologies is suspending its $20 million corporate travel account effective today, pending a satisfactory resolution to this matter. Reference Flight 782, they'll know exactly what it's about. Brenda didn't argue. She only replied with the quiet certainty of someone long accustomed to following orders that carried weight. Understood. I'll have the letter drafted within the hour. Maya's next call was sharper, colder. Catherine Webb, please. A brief hold, then the voice of one of the most feared corporate litigators in America came through. Catherine, it's Maya. I've just experienced a targeted act of discrimination on board a transcontinental flight. The plane returned to LAX because of it. I need Dalton, Webb, and Finch mobilized now. This is no longer about an incident, it's about systemic accountability. File the groundwork, and Catherine, prepare for war. On the other end, Catherine's laugh was low and predatory. You always did know how to pick a fight worth fighting. Consider it done. Maya ended the call, sliding her phone back into her coat pocket with precision. Around her, the atmosphere shifted. Thomas Reed, the station manager, had overheard enough to understand the scale of what had just been unleashed. His face drained of color sweat, darkening the collar of his rumpled shirt. This was no longer a passenger complaint. This was a detonation. Behind him, Carolyn Miller leaned against the bulkhead, pale and rigid. The arrogance that had fueled her venom at 30,000 feet was gone. In its place was something colder, the dawning recognition that she was no longer in control of the narrative. Maya Robinson hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't thrown a tantrum. With a phone, a name, and a dollar figure, she had turned her personal insult into an existential threat to an airline. The war had begun. Would you have made those calls immediately, or waited until after leaving the airport, comment immediate if you'd strike fast like Maya, or wait if you'd hold off? By the time Dr. Maya Robinson's car had left the airport curb, shockwaves were already ripping through American Meridian Airlines' Chicago headquarters. An email from her office had landed in the inbox of CEO Edward Coleman, carrying words that no executive ever wanted to read. Effective immediately, Agrinova Technologies suspends its $20 million corporate travel account pending resolution of Flight 782. Coleman, a man notorious for his bottom-line focus, erupted in fury. A coffee request turns into a grounded plane and a suspended 8-figure account. How is this possible? His voice thundered across the executive boardroom, echoing off glass walls and shaking the confidence of every vice president seated around the table. All eyes turned to Gregory Adler, the senior vice president of human resources. Adler was a career company man, his instincts wired to protect the brand. First people, second. He sat stiffly, smoothing his tie, but inside he was already mapping out a strategy. A rogue employee could be sacrificed, a corporate culture admitting to racism that was far too expensive. We'll investigate, Adler said smoothly, his tone practiced. But let's remember, we have a 30-year veteran flight attendant on one side, and on the other, a high-profile passenger with everything to gain from exaggerating. My recommendation contained this quickly. Frame it as an unfortunate miscommunication. Coleman's glare was volcanic. Miscommunication doesn't ground a plane, Greg. Fix this. Adler left the boardroom with his marching orders, but his mind was already rehearsing the narrative. Lorraine Miller was seasoned, loyal, and protected by the Flight Attendants Union. Dr. Robinson, however, could be painted as a difficult, entitled executive who overplayed her hand. If Adler could control the paperwork, massage the witness statements, and feed a gentler version of events to the press, American Meridian could emerge bruised but intact. Back in his office, Adler began sketching the outline of a letter, polished regret, denial of discrimination. Blame shifted subtly back toward the passenger. He would call it de-escalation. In reality, it was the first move of a cover-up. But what Adler didn't yet realize was this: by trying to bury Maya Robinson's truth, he wasn't protecting the airline, he was signing its death warrant. Gregory Adler wasted no time. Within 48 hours of the incident, he had summoned Carolyn Miller to Chicago. She arrived not humbled, but armed with a union representative at her side and a carefully rehearsed story. Her eyes were red from tears, her hands clutching tissues, her voice quivering with a performance Adler was eager to amplify. Mr. Adler, she began, dabbing her eyes, I've given 30 years of my life to this airline. I've served everyone, celebrities, politicians, royalty. Never in all my time have I been treated the way Dr. Robinson treated me. Adler leaned forward, nodding sympathetically, feeding the script. Go on. She was arrogant from the moment she boarded. Carolyn continued, her voice breaking in perfectly timed intervals. Dismissive, demanding. When I didn't run to her, the second she pressed the call button, she became hostile. She twisted my words, accused me of things I never said. It was a setup. I could feel it. She wanted me to fail. Her eyes hardened suddenly, venom surfacing beneath the trembling act. And when she mentioned her corporate account, when she said she'd ruin us, I realized this wasn't about coffee. This was extortion, a power play. Adler's lips curved into a thin smile. It was exactly the narrative he needed. Not a veteran attendant targeting a black woman CEO, but an entitled executive bullying a loyal employee. He scribbled notes, already drafting the storyline in his head. So, in your professional opinion, Adler pressed, Dr. Robinson was never distressed. Her claims of feeling unsafe were exaggerated. Absolutely, Carolyn snapped. It was all theater. And the captain, he folded. He let her manipulate him. I'm the victim here. Adler leaned back, satisfied. He would build the defense on this shaky foundation, a narrative of an overbearing VIP exploiting her status. With selective phrasing from Captain Anderson's report, with Emily Carter's testimony minimized as impressionable, Adler could frame Maya as the aggressor. The next move was swift: a letter from American Meridian's legal department to Catherine Webb, Maya's attorney. It expressed regret for miscommunication, denied all allegations of discrimination, and offered a meager settlement, some travel vouchers, a discount, and an invitation to restore Agrinova's corporate account. It was corporate theater designed to pacify, to smear quietly, and to protect the airline at any cost. But Adler, like Carolyn, had underestimated Maya Robinson. He thought she would go away. Instead, he had just given her the proof she needed that this was no longer one incident, it was systemic rot. The letter from American Meridian's legal department arrived in a sleek cream-colored envelope, precisely worded, sterile and smug. It was corporate language masquerading as contrition. We regret the miscommunication on Flight 782, it began. No mention of Carolyn Miller's insults, no acknowledgement of targeted harassment, just vague regret followed by denial. According to the airline, Dr. Maya Robinson had been an agitated passenger whose escalating demands created disruption. At the bottom, their solution sat like a slap a few $1,000s worth of travel vouchers and a reinstated discount on Agrinova's corporate account should she choose to return. Catherine Webb, Maya's attorney, read the letter twice. Then she laughed out loud, a sharp, derisive sound that echoed in her office. "Amateurs," she muttered, pushing the papers across her desk. "They're not just insulting you, Maya. They're building a defense. This isn't an apology, it's a strategy. They're preparing to paint you as the angry black woman in court." Maya absorbed the words in silence, her fingers tracing the edges of the letter. Anger didn't come, not the hot, consuming kind. Instead, a cooler force rose within her, solid as steel. Disappointment, clarity, resolve. "So this is their play," she said quietly. "Protect their own. Pretend the problem doesn't exist. Smear me until I either back down or break." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "Catherine, they think this is about me wanting vouchers. They think I want an apology. They have no idea what's coming." Webb leaned forward, her shark's grin widening. "Then let's show them." Maya's voice sharpened. "Forget settlement talks. Forget negotiation. I don't want an apology anymore. I want transformation. I want to expose their culture, not just their crew. I want every complaint, every cover-up, every skeleton in Adler's office dragged into daylight. They tried to erase me. Now I'll erase their excuses." For Adler and Carolyn, it had been a game of delay and denial. For Maya, the war had just changed. This wasn't about compensation. It was about revolution. Gregory Adler knew the letter alone wouldn't hold. Corporate cover-ups thrived not on single documents, but on narratives carefully seeded, whispered, and amplified until they became truth. So within days, an orchestrated campaign began to swirl through the back channels of the aviation world. Anonymous sources leaked to industry blogs. Insider forums hummed with a sanitized storyline. The script was always the same. A difficult VIP passenger threw her weight around over a trivial service complaint, forcing a flight to turn back. No mention of race, no mention of Carolyn Miller's upgraded by mistake insult. The story was stripped to its corporate skeleton and entitled "Executive Overreacting." The tactic worked quickly. Maya Robinson's phone buzzed one morning with a call from a colleague at another tech company. His tone was cautious, almost embarrassed. "Maya, I heard something about you on Flight 782. Someone told me you had a flight attendant in tears. Is that true?" The injustice hit like a cold knife. Not only were they refusing to acknowledge the harm, they were punishing her for exposing it. Maya's reputation, built on decades of brilliance and discipline, was now under quiet attack. The angry black woman trope was their weapon of choice, wielded in whispers. For a moment, the weight of it threatened to crush her. Years of building, years of fighting to belong, and here it was again, erasure rebranded as rumor. But then clarity returned. Adler and Miller had made the same fatal mistake Lorraine had made in the cabin. They underestimated her. Maya was not just a CEO, she was a scientist who thrived on data, a strategist who thrived on patterns. She knew smear campaigns relied on silence, and she would not be silent. She called Catherine Webb. Her voice was cool, unshakable. "They want to fight dirty fine. Forget optics, forget vouchers. This is bigger now. I want discovery motions. I want every complaint filed against them for the past 10 years. I want Adler's fingerprints on every denial, every cover-up. They think this is about one flight. No, it's about an entire culture. They think I'll break, but Catherine," her voice hardened, "we're going to break them." The war was no longer personal. It was systemic. Emily Carter sat nervously in the corner of a quiet coffee shop far from LAX, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup that had long gone cold. Her eyes darted toward the door every few seconds, as though expecting a supervisor or union rep to burst in and scold her simply for being there. When Dr. Maya Robinson entered, calm and assured, Emily nearly stood, but instead sank lower into her chair, guilt etched across her young face. "Dr. Robinson," Emily began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know if I can do this. They've already warned me. If I talk, I'll be blacklisted. I'll lose everything." Maya sat across from her, not as an accuser, but as an ally. Her tone was warm, deliberate, stripped of all the icy precision she had wielded on the plane. "Emily, I'm not here to pressure you. I'm here to tell you why I'm fighting this. This isn't about me getting compensation or revenge. This is about making sure what happened on Flight 782 never happens again. Not to me, not to you, not to anyone." Emily's eyes glistened. "But Lorraine, she's powerful. The others, they protect her. If I speak, they'll destroy me. Maya leaned in, her voice soft but firm. People like Carolyn Miller thrive because good people stay silent. They use fear to keep everyone in line. But fear only works if you're alone. She slid a small card across the table. You won't be alone. Catherine Webb's legal team will give you whistleblower protection, full legal representation free of charge. And if the airline tries to bury you, I'll guarantee you a position at Agrinova, better pay, better future starting tomorrow if you need it. Your courage won't cost you your career. It will build it. Emily's breath hitched. For weeks she had been drowning in silence, trapped between her conscience and her fear. Maya had just handed her a lifeline. Tears welled, but this time they weren't from fear, they were from relief. Okay, Emily whispered, her hands trembling, as she set down her untouched coffee. I'll tell them everything. Maya gave a small nod, her expression one of quiet pride. A single voice had challenged an airline. Now, with Emily's testimony, that voice was about to become a chorus. When Emily Carter finally gave her full testimony, the dam broke. In a quiet, glass-walled conference room at Dalton Webb and Finch, the young attendant's voice quivered at first, but the longer she spoke, the steadier she became. She described in painful detail the inner workings of first-class cliques led by Carolyn Miller, how senior attendants traded routes like currency, mocked passengers in the galley, and most damning of all, how they singled out travelers of color who received upgrades. She called them seat fillers. Emily admitted, her eyes downcast. She said they didn't belong up there. She'd deliberately skip them, forget their meals, ignore their requests. What happened to Dr. Robinson? It wasn't an accident. It was the most blatant I've seen, but it wasn't the first. It was her pattern. The words hit the table like evidence carved into stone. Catherine Webb leaned forward, her pen motionless, her shark's grin slowly sharpening. This wasn't just testimony, it was the key that unlocked the bigger story. Behind Emily's recollections were years of rot. Catherine's team filed a sweeping discovery motion demanding Carolyn Miller's entire personnel file and, more crucially, HR's handling of passenger complaints under Gregory Adler. American Meridian's lawyers fought desperately to block it, citing privacy and undue burden. But the judge, moved by Emily's courage and bolstered by William Brooks's deposition, granted the motion. When the boxes arrived, dozens of them heavy with reports, memos, and expense sheets, paralegals at Dalton Webb and Finch dove in like archaeologists unearthing a buried city. At first the findings seemed thin, minor complaints, boilerplate dismissals, Adler's signature stamped like a seal of denial on page after page. It looked scrubbed, sanitized, almost too clean. But Catherine knew better. They didn't erase the truth, she told her team, eyes locked on the mountains of paper. They buried it. Look for patterns, look for what doesn't fit, and patterns began to emerge. Expense reports that didn't line up with itineraries, complaint forms mentioning the same names again and again, always dismissed without follow-up. A web of small anomalies, insignificant alone, but damning when strung together. Emily Carter's courage had done more than expose one act of bigotry. It had opened the door to a hidden culture, a system of prejudice, negligence, and cover-ups. And with every document uncovered, Gregory Adler's house of cards shook closer to collapse. Do you think patterns always reveal the truth, no matter how deeply buried comment patterns, if you believe nothing stays hidden forever? Weeks into combing through the mountain of files, exhaustion was settling over the legal team. Page after page seemed designed to bore, to lull, to hide. Passenger complaints that went nowhere, incident reports rubber-stamped, unsubstantiated, expense sheets bloated with meaningless detail. For a moment, it looked as if Gregory Adler's fortress of paper would hold. But then one junior paralegal noticed it, an anomaly buried deep in a stack of financial records. The meal and lodging expenses for certain international layovers didn't add up. In Lisbon, Rio de Janeiro, even Zurich, Carolyn Miller's receipts stood out like ink blots on white paper. Michelin-starred restaurants, luxury boutique hotels, charges that dwarfed the standard crew allowance. And every single one had been approved, signed off without question. Why would HR include financial records in a personnel file? Catherine Webb murmured, narrowing her eyes. It didn't make sense unless someone didn't realize what they were handing over, or unless someone had gotten sloppy. She ordered a background check on the approving manager. The result came back the next morning: Martin Miller, Carolyn's ex-husband. A mid-level finance officer who had retired 5 years earlier after what was described as an acrimonious divorce. Find him, Catherine ordered. When investigators reached Martin in Florida, the bitterness poured out like floodwater. Carolyn thinks she's untouchable, he sneered. She's been scamming that airline for years. Those expense reports. That's nothing. The real money was in cargo. What he revealed left even the hardened attorneys silent. Carolyn, he explained, had built a side operation smuggling antiques and rare valuables through international flights. Small items, jewelry icons, rare books would be tucked into custom crew baggage, which bypassed normal customs checks. A ground crew contact ensured her bags were never flagged. It was elegant, invisible, and lucrative, and Martin still had proof copies of offshore bank statements tied to accounts Carolyn thought were hidden. I kept them, he admitted, a bitter smile curling his lips. I knew one day the storm would come. Looks like it finally has. What had begun as a fight over dignity had now unearthed something far darker. Discrimination wasn't the only rot in American Meridian's system. Beneath it lurked a federal crime ring, and Carolyn Miller was at its center. The mahogany boardroom at American Meridian's Chicago headquarters was designed to intimidate floor-to-ceiling glass, a panoramic view of the skyline, and a table long enough to seat a small army. But on this day, the power in the room did not belong to CEO Edward Coleman or his polished legal counsel. It belonged to Dr. Maya Robinson and Catherine Webb, who carried with them a folder heavy enough to sink the airline. Coleman tried to begin with formality, but Catherine cut straight through. She slid the folder across the table, her voice like ice. Mr. Coleman, yesterday we delivered a copy of this file to the Department of Justice. Inside is sworn testimony, offshore bank statements, and corroborating evidence linking your senior flight attendant, Carolyn Miller, to an international smuggling operation. She used your aircraft, your uniforms, and your lax oversight to traffic antiques and jewelry across borders. Coleman's lawyer flipped through the documents, his face draining of color with each page. When Coleman finally looked down, his expression cycled from disbelief to dread. This can't be real. It's very real, Catherine replied, and it gets worse. Your HR Vice President Gregory Adler was so busy burying a discrimination complaint that he ignored every red flag in Miller's file. His negligence allowed a criminal enterprise to thrive under your nose. He didn't just fail my client, he failed your company. Maya's voice followed, calm but unyielding. I told your captain this was about accountability. Your airline chose to protect a bigot, and in doing so, you protected a felon. That is the culture Adler built. And now it has reached its reckoning. Coleman's shoulders slumped, his bravado collapsing under the weight of inevitability. What do you want? He asked, his voice hoarse. Catherine didn't blink. Here is what will happen. Gregory Adler will be terminated for gross negligence. You will issue a full public apology to Dr. Robinson, acknowledging the discrimination. You will fund a new mandatory anti-bias training program, the Robinson Initiative, independent and monitored externally. And finally, you will settle with my client for 8 figures, non-negotiable. The silence was suffocating. Coleman's lawyer gave a tiny shake of his head. There was no path forward but surrender. Agreed, Coleman whispered the word, tasting like ash. The war was over. Maya Robinson hadn't just won, she had forced an empire to its knees. Do you believe true justice means more than money, that it requires systemic change? Comment justice if you stand with Maya's fight for accountability.